Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're analyzing a pretty fascinating stack of sources that explain how ancient stories and national myths, they aren't just cultural artifacts.
Yeah, not at all.
They're systematically engineered and sometimes, just completely fabricated to become these potent long-term political tools. It's like we're reading the instruction manual for rewriting history.
We're starting with this incredible piece of context you brought up.
Yeah.
Back in the 1930s in Turkey, the word eager literally meant civilization.
Eagerlik medeniyet.
Yeah, it was a byword for a high cultural standard.
Yeah.
But today the Uyghur people are known globally as a community facing just severe oppression.
It's just a staggering reversal in less than 100 years. And what the sources are saying is that this is no accident.
Mm-hmm.
This shift is the result of what one researcher calls China's historical use of endless tricks, deceit, and deception.
Precisely. And the research really zeroes in on this one specific concept that the source speaker developed. He calls it Mythostrategy.
Mitostratejik.
Right. It's not a standard term you'll find in the literature, but it's meant to define this methodical, really calculated process of turning common cultural memory into active political power.
Okay, so that's our target. Our mission for this deep dive is, first, let's unpack the 4 foundational concepts that make up this idea of mythostrategy.
Right.
And then we'll analyze 3, frankly, stunning historical examples from China that show exactly how it's deployed to secure national goals. So let's start with the basics of how this machine even works.
Okay, so to get mythostrategy, you first have to understand its power source, which is the myth itself.
Mm-hmm.
A myth in this context isn't just a fairy tale. It's a story about divine actions that are believed to be real, to be sacred. And critically, they establish archetypes.
The perfect models for how we should act.
Exactly, the models for all meaningful human behavior.
So it sets the mold for society. If, a divine ancestor did something, then we have a sort of moral obligation to do it too.
That's it. And that brings us to the second piece, the power of myth. Because it creates that moral imperative in people, that obligation. It enforces a common consciousness.
It's a unifying force.
A uniquely spiritual one. The source quotes the Chinese sociologist Fei Xiaotong, who said that this unifying force, because it gets into the human spirit, can be stronger than a large army.
Wow, a spiritual power stronger than an army. That puts a whole different spin on narrative control. So, okay, if myth is the power source, the second half of the term is strategy.
Right.
We all kind of know what strategy is, but the source gives it a very specific, almost technical definition here.
It does. It moves past the military definition and boils it down to a formula: power plus concept plus goal.
Okay.
So strategy, in this sense, is the organization of that spiritual power, the power from the myth, to reach a very specific, predetermined political or territorial objective.
So you combine the two, the unifying moral power of a story and the organized method of strategy, and you get mythostrategy.
Which the source defines as the intentional method of using myths, mythical ancestors, heroes, whatever, for specific political ends.
To unite people, guide societies, and, I'm guessing, gain economic benefit.
That's a critical part of it. And you see it used in 2 ways. Internally, it legitimizes the political system, turns shared memory into actual power.
And externally?
Externally, it's targeted.
Yeah.
It's used to direct and transform other cultures, other societies, and to justify, expansion and taking over resources.
Okay, before we jump into the case studies, the source briefly mentions a kind of sibling concept, right? Theostrategy.
Right, yeah. They're related, but they use different toolkits. Theostrategy, which is a concept from Professor Nadip Mesid, uses organized religion. Think clergy, sects, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Mythostrategy, on the other hand, uses that common cultural memory that predates organized religion. Things centered on mythical ancestors like, say, Oguz Ata in Turkic history. It's more about cultural borrowing.
I see. It's synthesis versus religious control. Understood. So that's the framework. Now let's see how it's actually put into practice. And we're starting with the biggest one, the foundational myth for mass assimilation, Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor.
Huangdi. He's presented as one of China's legendary founders, the claimed first ancestor of the Chinese people. I mean, he's the cornerstone of their national identity.
And his imagery is completely tied to the dragon.
Oh, absolutely.
It's why Chinese leaders today still call their people the children of the dragon. It's a cultural symbol that's bigger than politics.
Exactly. And that symbol is the lever. The strategic goal is to push the idea that Huangdi isn't just the ancestor of the Han Chinese, but of all ethnic groups.
So minorities aren't conquered people, they're brothers.
Exactly. They share this ancient parent. It's a calculated move to achieve national and territorial integrity under one really deep historical umbrella.
Okay, and here's the moment of, profound strategic deception. The research suggests Huangdi was very likely not ethnically Han Chinese at all.
The evidence is pretty compelling. Sources point to his origins in the northwestern Gansu region. Historians, like Enver Batur, they indicate Huangdi and his counterpart Yendi, they were pastoral, nomadic Changs.
From the upper Yellow River, a region historically home to non-Han nomadic tribes. The Hun, Turk, Tibetan peoples.
That's right.
So wait, the very foundation of centralized Chinese identity, the mythological father of the nation, was probably borrowed from the nomadic minorities in the Northwest, the same people who would later become territorial targets.
That's the strategic genius of it.
How has that not destabilized the whole claim to unity?
Because of the really sophisticated engineering process, it was a layered appropriation. The myths started out as oral stories among those minority groups.
Stories about the Northwest.
Yes. But then the Han Dynasty undertook this calculated effort to write them down, and in doing so, they attributed them wholly to the central Chinese identity. They didn't just borrow them, they reauthored them.
That's the trick. They didn't just tell the story, they wrote the definitive edition and then deified the main character.
Absolutely. Huangdi was systematically elevated, placed at the center of the Chinese pantheon, made superior to all other gods. His worship became a mandatory cultural practice. That's the power of myth in action.
But the strategy wasn't just mythological, it was brilliantly geographical. How do you cement a mythological claim over a vast, contested piece of land?
You put the spiritual center of power on that contested land. The source details how Huangdi was said to live on Kunlun Mountain, the mythical home of the gods, with 12 jade palaces.
And Kunlun Mountain is enormous. It straddles the borders of East Turkestan and Tibet.
Exactly.
I see it now. So by placing the center of their pantheon in the western regions, they were laying a symbolic claim to those lands millennia before the physical occupation was even complete.
It anchored the entire origin story. And this move linked all subsequent Chinese dynasties and leaders, even the rulers of Hun, Turk, and Mongol origin. It linked them all back to Huangdi. It solidified political authority over those Western territories.
So no matter who was actually on the throne, the philosophical center of the nation was always strategically pointed west.
That's right. It's an incredible piece of long-term narrative strategy.
Truly a masterclass. Okay, let's move to the second case study. Another figure whose story justifies that same westward push, Xuangmu, the Queen Mother of the West.
Xuangmu, she's a highly respected goddess, often tied to fertility, and crucially, she has the elixir of immortality. She's sometimes shown with a tiger head and a human body.
And let me guess, just like Huangdi, the research says her origins are also outside the central Han identity.
Correct. She belonged to the Western Chang and Ru tribes. They used the tiger as a totem, which explains the iconography. Uyghur scholars have gone even further.
And what do they say?
They identify Xuangmu as Ume Ana, a powerful Turkish mythological figure, a leader in the Tarim Basin near what we now call Heavenly Lake.
So another key figure who controls immortality and fertility, two ultimate sources of power, is borrowed from the very regions the Chinese wanted to control. What was the specific mythostrategy they applied with her?
With her, the key was using her story to create a permanent cultural magnet pulling everyone's attention west.
How so?
The sources talk about this famous meeting between an early Zhou king, King Zhao, and Ume Ana or Xuangmu around the 10th century BCE. This meeting was mythologized to create the perception of a kind of utopian homeland out in the west.
A promised land. And it's located in the target territory.
Yes. The stories often have Xuangmu sending maps and jade gifts to Chinese emperors. The source argues this wasn't just a friendly exchange, it was profound political symbolism.
It created a mythological justification for going there.
It did. It drew the attention of emperors westward for centuries, justifying the eventual occupation. And of course, her home is also placed on Kunlun Mountain, the same strategic anchor as Huangdi.
So they anchored two of their most significant ancestral figures to the same contested mountain range. It reinforces the West as the spiritual, cultural, and political source of the entire nation. It creates a narrative gravity that's incredibly hard to fight.
It makes controlling that land an intergenerational cultural imperative, not just some temporary political goal.
Okay, now let's get to our third case study. And this one is maybe the most audacious because it shows mythostrategy doesn't even need a real person. It can just use pure fabrication. Sun Wukong, the Monkey King.
Sun Wukong, yeah. One of the most beloved characters in all of Chinese literature. He's from the Ming Dynasty novel Journey to the West. He's mythical, can change into 72 forms. I mean, he is explicitly, undeniably a fictional character.
So the strategy is to take a fictional superhero and try to pass him off as a historical figure who traveled through East Turkestan, all to create an illusion of ancient historical ownership. That's incredible.
It's the ultimate expression of forcing fiction to become geographical fact. And the source points to a really blatant attempt, a 2003 report in the official People's Daily.
What did it say?
It detailed the so-called discovery of a statue that looked like Sun Wukong on a mountain in Turpan's Yalkanda region. And even though everyone knows he's a literary character, there were immediate efforts to put up statues and claim he lived here.
They're retroactively writing land deeds using a fantasy novel. They're taking the unifying spiritual power of a really popular story and just grafting it onto real geography.
And that just goes to show that mythostrategy is an active, ongoing process. It's not some historical curiosity.
Yeah.
It shows a willingness to create historical links, even through absurdity, if the cultural story is powerful enough to carry the political weight.
So if we connect all these dots, Huangdi, Xuanmu, Sun Wukong, the systematic nature is just undeniable. But we should be clear, using myths for legitimacy is pretty common, right, globally?
Wow, absolutely. The sources even mention the Turkish example of tracing the commoner Seljuk Bey back to the mythical Afrasiab to give him political legitimacy.
Right. So what makes the Chinese application stand out so much?
It's the relentless, large-scale assimilation that makes it unique. By imposing the borrowed figure of Huangdi as the common ancestor, the Central Kingdom created what the sources call a great assimilation cauldron.
And this contributed to the growth of the Han population?
Directly. And it helps secure the loyalty of all these diverse groups.
Yeah.
By borrowing and processing the minority group's own myths, the central state neutralized them culturally, while using those very same myths to justify territorial claims against them.
It's a brilliant, if ruthless, strategy.
It successfully united vast territories and peoples. The legacy of Huangdi and the Dragon isn't just a charming historical reference. It is actively used in political circles today to reinforce that national identity. And this framework, it has leaped beyond just geopolitics.
You mean into the commercial world?
Absolutely. The sources point out that modern marketing uses mythostrategy all the time for economic gain. Just think about brand names like Nike.
Or the Greek goddess of victory.
Right? Or Volvo, Pegasus, Amore. Yeah. These brands borrow universally recognized mythical or historical power to boost sales. They're tapping into that same shared cultural consciousness.
So bringing this all back to our starting point, what does this all mean? The core takeaway here is that mythostrategy is a meticulously calculated method. It turns shared cultural memory, whether it's borrowed or just made up, into directed, potent political and territorial power. It's an engine of cultural absorption.
And if we close that loop, this explains why the status of the Uyghur people shifted so dramatically, from being symbols of civilization to being seen as a group that needs to be assimilated or controlled. The success of the Huangdi mythostrategy created a central identity that systematically marginalizes and claims ownership over any group, no matter how civilized, whose very existence challenges that engineered narrative.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. If these mythical figures and stories really do have a spiritual power that can be stronger than an army, where else might this hidden, targeted use of narrative be at work right now? We've talked about politics and marketing, but just imagine for a second. What if those seemingly innocent historical facts or entertaining fictional stories you consume today, narratives often based on appropriated or altered history, what if they're actually the subtle mythological foundations of future political or commercial claims? This is a battleground of narrative control, and understanding mythostrategy is the essential first step to seeing the engineered landscape.